The theater buzzed with excitement as the next contestant stepped onto the stage. He wasn't flashy or confident, just an ordinary, quiet-looking young man in a simple shirt and jeans. His hands fidgeted with the microphone, and his eyes flickered nervously toward the judges' table. The audience immediately sensed his hesitation, their murmurs growing louder as they exchanged skeptical glances. This didn't look like someone who could command a stage. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but clearly doubtful, while Sophia and Heidi smiled encouragingly, sensing his nerves. When asked to introduce himself, his voice came out barely above a whisper. "My name is Daniel," he said softly, his words almost swallowed by the echo of the hall. A few giggles rippled through the audience, not out of cruelty, but disbelief that such a timid figure could possibly make an impression in a show filled with bold personalities and big voices. He nodded politely when Simon asked what song he would perform, and then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and waited for the music to start. The first few piano notes filled the air, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Then, as Daniel opened his mouth to sing, something completely unexpected happened. A deep, powerful, soulful voice poured out of him, echoing through the theater like a wave of raw emotion. The audience collectively gasped, and even the judges sat up straighter. His voice was rich with pain, strength, and vulnerability, a voice that seemed to carry a lifetime of emotion. The once quiet young man suddenly looked alive, his posture straightening as confidence began to replace fear. Each lyric he sang painted a picture of struggle and hope, his voice trembling not with fear, but with passion. The crowd grew silent, mesmerized by the transformation happening before them. Simon's skeptical expression softened into genuine surprise, and Sophia whispered something to Heidi, both of them smiling with astonishment. The camera zoomed in close, capturing Daniel's closed eyes, the slight tremble in his jaw, and the emotion etched across his face. As the song reached its climax, Daniel's voice soared higher, stronger, and purer than anyone expected. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium, wrapping everyone in its warmth and sincerity. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was electric, then came an explosion of applause and cheers that shook the room. The quiet guy who everyone doubted just moments before had silenced the crowd, not with words, but with a voice that demanded to be heard. In that instant, Daniel wasn't the nervous, quiet man anymore, he was a showstopper. As the music swelled and the rhythm intensified, Daniel's confidence began to bloom like a fire igniting within him. The stage lights shifted, painting him in warm gold and deep blue tones that danced across the floor. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the transformation happening before their eyes. Gone was the shy, trembling figure who had nervously mumbled his name just minutes ago. In his place stood a man who seemed born for this very moment. His voice, once tentative, now soared with control and emotion, filling every inch of the theater. Each note carried a story, each breath seemed to echo the years of silence he had hidden behind. Simon Cowell, who had started the performance with his usual skepticism, was now watching intently, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Sophia and Heidi exchanged glances, their eyes wide with admiration. Howie leaned closer to the table, nodding to the rhythm, clearly impressed. The audience was no longer whispering or waiting for him to stumble, they were completely spellbound. Some began clapping along softly, then louder, their energy feeding back into Daniel's performance. It was as though the entire room had become a single heartbeat, pulsing with his music. The camera panned to the crowd, people with their hands over their hearts, eyes glistening, some even recording with their phones to capture the magic of the moment. Daniel's movements grew more expressive, he stepped forward, raising his hand slightly as his voice hit a soaring high note that seemed to slice through the air with purity and power. It wasn't just a song anymore, it was a confession, a release, a triumph. He had found his voice, and it was magnificent. The music built to its climax, the drums and piano blending perfectly with the raw emotion in his voice. He sang the final chorus with everything inside him, his face glowing with sweat and tears, his body trembling with passion. As the last note rang out, Daniel held it just long enough for the audience to feel it deep within their chests, and then, silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. The crowd rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation, cheers echoing through the theater. The judges stood with them, clapping and smiling proudly. Daniel looked up, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. He had done it, he had taken the stage that once terrified him and turned it into his kingdom. As the applause thundered through the hall, Daniel stood frozen, tears glistening in his eyes. The weight of what had just happened hadn't yet sunk in. He had walked onto that stage trembling with fear, expecting little more than polite claps, but now the entire theater was on its feet, roaring his name. The golden lights shimmered across the faces of the judges, each of them visibly moved by what they had just witnessed. Simon Cowell leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, the faintest smile breaking across his usually stern expression. When the cheering finally began to fade, Simon raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Daniel," he began, his tone softer than usual, "I think everyone here tonight agrees on one thing, we didn't see that coming." The audience laughed warmly, still buzzing with emotion. Simon continued, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You walked out here like you didn't belong on this stage. But from the moment you opened your mouth, everything changed. That wasn't just singing, that was storytelling. That was heart. You came in as a quiet guy, and you've just become the biggest voice in this entire room." The crowd erupted again, chanting Daniel's name. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Sofia Vergara smiled tenderly, saying, "You showed us that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest souls." Heidi added, "Your voice gave me goosebumps from the very first note. That's what this show is all about, finding magic in unexpected places." Howie leaned forward, his tone full of emotion. "Daniel, you didn't just surprise us. You inspired us. You reminded everyone here to never judge a book by its cover." Before Daniel could even process their words, Simon looked down at the golden buzzer. The entire audience gasped. He placed his hand on it, glanced up at Daniel, and smiled. "You deserve this," Simon said, pressing the button. The room exploded with joy. The signature golden confetti shot into the air, cascading down like a golden storm. Daniel dropped to his knees, laughing and crying all at once as the glittering rain coated his hair, his clothes, and the stage beneath him. The judges clapped and cheered while the audience screamed in delight. Cameras zoomed in to capture the moment, the quiet man standing in a golden glow, overwhelmed by emotion, clutching his chest in disbelief. For Daniel, this wasn't just a victory on a talent show. It was proof that sometimes, the softest voices are destined to be heard by the world.